Welcome to Love and Life. I'm Dr. Karen Anderson Abril here with my co-host,
Pastor Elliott Anderson.
And Love and Life is your place to hear conversations grounded in psych research, psychotherapy,
and biblical truth
to help us thrive in love and life. Elliott, I'm going to wait until you're paying attention.
Sorry.
This is the story of my life.
Stuff away.
Love and Life community, this is the story of my life.
I've already had multiple meetings this morning already, so I'm a little
Elliott,
spazzy
look
already.
At me. Pay attention.
Hey, there you are.
I'm the little sister. Can someone care? No, I was told to shut up.
But who would come walk you home when Dad didn't allow you to walk home on your own, right? Who would come get you?
Yeah, you had to. You had to be the big brother there and protect me. So I was up Beth and Diane's till 10:30 at night.
It was not that far either.
No, it was.
That's interesting in the 70s that Dad wanted me to go up there and get you for that small distance. I understand if it was Swetchnau's or something way up the hill or something, that's a little different, but it was interesting. But I didn't have a problem. I was getting moving, do something.
I wonder if there'd been some creepy thing happen at Clifton somewhere or near the university and we didn't know. And so we didn't need to know, but yeah. I mean, it was the 70s. There were streakers, there's a lot of drugs, a lot of hippies.
Yeah. A lot of drugs in our neighborhood.
Yeah. On our street, once the Tucker boys got going and Rick Scarrett. I'm calling names now. Anyway, oh, poor guy.
Yeah, that rockin' always,
Yeah, self-soothing, stimming probably to some degree.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're taking a quick little kind of sidebar related, but sidebar from our series on It's Just a Blank Drug, partly because as I was thinking about it and then Tim was sending us stuff, this series could go on for a very long time because our culture has so normalized pharmacological interventions for so many different conditions. And I know our community is well aware of this because we talk about it a lot. And you and I are professionals in the mental health space that are very firmly, I would put myself in the totally anti-pharma camp at this point, but I at least pharma wary and pharma skeptical. And I just listened to another podcast this morning as I was walking the dogs by a great podcast called Mad in America, as in crazy in America. And it's a great resource for anyone who wants to learn how to taper off psychotropic medications.
Two things. One, I'm going to even stand stronger than what you were just saying. I think not only have we normalized pharmacological response to what we considered common human emotional challenges.
Yes, right.
We've made it the right move.
That's what they were talking about.
What is supposed to be happening. That is way different than just, hey, here's an option.
That's what they were saying. It's so funny you bring that up as a point.
And then second, let me get going. Then you get cooking. Right. And then second, it's not only difficult to wean off, it's dangerous.
Yes.
So when I'm working with clients who are like, hey, I want to start that process, I said, we're going to take it slow. And we're going to build in, just like you weaned up, we're going to wean down.
Yeah.
Or you grew up, we're going to wean down, or amped up, whatever the right terminology is. So I just wanted to say those two things as you keep giving our intro.
Listen, when I make a point with fervor and passion, and then you see me and raise me, I'm here for it all day.
I know you're happy.
I'm so happy. No, because they were talking about this man. He was actually Norwegian American, born in Norway, but raised in American schools. So, and he's a comedian anyway. So of course. Yeah, he's our cousin. But he was talking about how for so many years, his doctors framed his psychotropic use as the noble thing to do because he's like, do you want to be a bad person and be on street drugs? Or do you want to be a good person and be on prescribed drugs? And of course, we know that many of these that are prescribed.
So drugs was the answer. It's just which side of the coin you want to go. Yeah.
Either way. Yeah. The idea that we have, like to your point, so normalized and even made it a noble response. And I was in my Bible study, and I told you this the other day when we were on the phone. I was in my Bible study on Monday, and we're doing a new series on spiritual warfare, which, goodness, of course, we came up we understood that there was a spiritual realm. I mean, the verses, we wage not against flesh and blood. We know that, but sometimes you see it so clearly. And as I was in the Bible study, we were just kind of setting the stage. We're going to start it next week. The idea that one of the spiritual battles I think we face as those in the mental health profession is that I believe Satan and his forces have co-opted or hijacked the mental health space to a degree, to the extent that now we medicalize, to your point earlier, a normal response to the very, very deeply, profoundly traumatic experiences that many of us go through life. And none of us will escape entirely. Hello. There is a valley of the shadow of death that Jesus talked, David talked about in 23rd. I did good, Pastor. I did good.
You pulled it back.
Pulled it back out. I went to Moses for a second because I was in the OT. It's like, wait a minute, he didn't write the whole
he's
thing.
in the Psalms too, so.
Does he? Does he write some Psalms?
Yeah, there's some Psalms for Moses in there, yeah.
Okay, see? All right, so I wasn't so far off. Anyway, point is, I am concerned, and you spoke to this in your series that we shared with the podcast community about 2-3 years ago now, about a biblical response to anxiety, biblical response to depression. So just to tee it up for what we're going to talk about today, and then I think we're going to delve into that series as well. I am deeply concerned that this pharmacological response, the medicalization, does have a root in a spiritual battle. Because
Absolutely.
We don't give our sadness and our anxiety to God. We give it to pharma.
One of my good friends who wrestles with massive mental health stuff did a deep dive on linking drugs to Satan in the Greek and Hebrew, and it was pretty profoundly
Wait, where is this?
evident.
Can we find this?
Boy, I got it somewhere in that context. And it's taking some, not leaps, but it's taking some movements to link some of these scenarios. But we also recognize throughout the history of the world, even without pharmacology that entered in the 40s and 50s as a primary, that people have been choosing drugs over healing for eternity, right? Yeah. In biblical times as well, right? So it's all there. And even Noah, who was a righteous man, one of the issues that happened with his sons is that he got himself so drunk that his sons uncovered his nakedness and they all judged for it. But don't miss out, the righteous man Noah was drunk. And scripture is very, very clear about drunkenness as a sin and inappropriate behavior, not drinking alcohol at all, but getting drunk. And one of the things, as I listened to you and David, very, very interesting, fascinating, great content and interplay. You guys interact very well together in your gifts and movements. One of the things that came to me spiritually over and over again is the passage in 1 Timothy 6, where Paul says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And so much of the corruption that takes place, as you and David talked about, the emails that were hidden and covered up, and then people still get jobs and CEO positions, board positions, even though they've been a part of tacit, specific death to innocent victims who were believing in these medications and they killed them. Not indirectly killed them, directly killed them. That money is so often the root of it. And corruption in business, corruption in politics, corruption in the church, corruption everywhere, often, along with other things, has a significant issue about money. And that's why Jesus talks more about money and stewardship than he does about heaven and hell in our recorded word. So there's a reason the financial piece is such an important element here of how blinded we can get sometimes by the profits, by the goals and the drive. And I'm certainly not anti-money, and it's something we all have to do well with and make. But man, does that often link with these just horrific decisions to risk people's lives for your bottom line.
A few years ago, I started having trouble falling asleep, and I started taking melatonin because I thought it was a natural way to try to relax myself, calm myself down, and go to sleep. But it turns out that as a hormone supplement, melatonin can disrupt our other hormones and we can build up an immunity to it. So when we started partnering with the wellness company, I was super excited to try their melatonin-free sleep aid called Restful Sleep. It includes passion flower, chamomile, valerian root, among other herbs and natural ways to help calm us down and get us ready to go to bed. I've been using it for a couple months now, and Restful Sleep helps my mind and body quiet themselves and ease into sleep. If you've ever had insomnia, you know how brutal it is. The wellness company's Restful Sleep can help. Head over to twc.health/lovelife and enter promo code LOVELIFE at checkout for 15% off your entire order. That's twc.health/lovelife and promo code LOVELIFE for 15% off your entire order.
Another point that struck me in a good way about your and David's conversations is most of the clients I work with don't know what to do about the information after they have it, besides learn and understand and process. How do they apply that in their own life and context for themselves? If they've been on Prozac for 20 years and they're like, gosh, this isn't not only not helping, it's making a lot of things worse, or I'm a zombie.
Yeah.
It's ironic to me how zombie crazy our society is with the movies the last 15, 20 years. That's exactly what we're doing ourselves. We're creating zombies amongst ourselves emotionally and mentally with all the medications.
Do we think that's a mistake, or is pharma funding these kind of movies just to get us all normalized to this condition?
Whether it's pharma
I went down another road.
Well, whether it's pharma or Satan, or
are they the same?
Satan, well, there's a lot of people in pharma, in politics, in churches that are quote unquote good people, want to do good, and then get blinded by the money, blinded by something, and that's often what Scripture says. The scales fell off Paul's eyes when Jesus struck him on the Damascus road as blind for a while, as he said, Saul, you're not persecuted anymore. You're now going to die for me. You're now going to do it the other way around. But all of us have a spiritual brokenness, and we're blinded by things. We're blinded by the truth. We're blinded by the reality. And if we want to get really practically minded, and this is one of the things I said to you and Tim, I'd like to hit some of these issues later, is how many of us have coffee addictions or nicotine addictions or alcohol addictions and act like it's no big deal? Excuse
me? Could you get off my coffee?
Right. I've wrestled with that often back and forth, not alcohol, not cigarettes or nicotine, but sugar and / Coke or coffee. I don't do a lot of coffee, but still. And so it's just that whole context too, is that sometimes we get worried appropriately by the gigantic issues, and yet the little ones, we're still doing the exact same. There's some hypocrisy in that if we're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know I come out hard with pharma. I'm not trying to, I obviously have all of my own weaknesses, and there's places where I'm blind. And I also realize that God gives us areas he enlightens us in certain realms and doesn't. Jesus, I don't know why, because I know that I have a lot of blind spots in other aspects of my life, which I think we should talk about at some point on the podcast, not like personally, but just to describe things that meaning like different things that I'm going through. I guess the gist of it, Elliott, is I know, and I pray that God gives us all ears to hear. And I know that sometimes when I'm so passionate about something, I can get very dad-like and my eyes pop out of my head just like Dad would. And it's just like, this is it. And then with Dad, it's like, well, he did research more than anyone else about this. So anyone else in my life, I got to trust him. Plus, he was brilliant. But I understand that sometimes that may come off as a bit arrogant or pompous and insensitive. And I don't want that to be the case. It's the passion is coming from, I want to protect you because I know these things and these entities are not to be trusted. Yeah. But I also don't want to, I do know there are areas where I have a blind spot. And I need people to come to me, and I need them to come in a way I can receive it. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. I don't think I'm still that's a work in progress is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. For like the trauma recovery work I do.
Yeah.
If you get stuck trying to orchestrate the sessions for some type of result, you're going to get drilled, because most don't make it. Right. Most of the crisis couples I work with don't end up making it. They're either divorced or it's just settled. As far as healing from everything, right? Because it's so difficult.
You've got a percentage?
No, I don't. No, I'd say 50-50.
Okay, I was going to say, I thought you had a decent number that would recover.
Yeah, there's plenty that recover, but I'm even talking about the one-time hit. Someone shows up and goes, we're struggling, someone referred to me, we want one session, and then I never hear from again. If I never hear from again, I pretty much assume it didn't make it. So I'm not talking about the ones I work with for a year or two, or et cetera. But the phrase I like to use, and I think it's applying to you as a stepmom as well, and all of us when it comes to pharmacology issues, the medicalization of our emotions, and the challenges of helping our children in this, which is where I want to go next, is releasing the right of the result.
Well, that's easy. No, that's not hard.
It's super hard. But we have to
make it happen.
Right?
Listen,
we have to release the right result.
Make it happen.
Right.
We were told
we can make our attitude happen. We can make our energy happen. We can make our love happen. We can't make the result happen.
Yeah.
Right. You know, all the foster kids, adopted kids, and crisis kids we've had in and out of our house, that got taught pretty quickly through tough life lessons of surrender and suffering. We're like, gosh, all the love I gave and doesn't always matter. Mm-hmm. It matters, of course, but it doesn't matter in a direct result. The result might be 10, 15 years down the road, not now. And so maybe it's a trite statement, but I think it's important. But the context of when I called you or you called me, I can't remember which, but when we talked about the series and what topics we want to take next, and I can't wait to take the Ritalin Adderall one next. That'll be awesome. Mm-hmm. I know a ton about it already, but I'm certainly going to research before we record again and give some more. But I told you I want to do a little bit of practicality.
Yeah.
And just say, okay, we know most of our listeners understand who we are, what we're about, and agree with us generally in a lot of this stuff. But then what do we do about it? How do you do it if your 15-year-old daughter comes to you and says, I want to be a boy? Or if your 13-year-old child says, which my daughters said to me when they were 13, every single one of my classmates is on an antidepressant. Do I need to get on one? No. But I understood what that meant societally and culturally, especially for girls. Not that boys don't have that need to belong and connect, but it's socially, emotionally a little bit different.
It is.
And I know that from coaching middle school girls compared to coaching middle school boys. That was a very different experience. And by the way, I enjoyed the girls better in the long run, even though we weren't very good, just because they were all in, giving me everything they had. But we had tears every game, and I had to learn what that was like. And so anyway, in the context of what do we do about that? That's what I wanted to land the plane here for 10 minutes, even 15 minutes, just to, as we go into our next, it's just Ritalin or it's just Adderall. I think that's the next one we're going to record. So Karen, as I was listening and really enjoying the work you guys were doing, it was ironic that I was the one listening and saying, hey, I want to put a little bit of brass tacks, a little bit of structure to this, and maybe something super practical for families or people who are wrestling with this. And that was the acronym of LOVE. So it's LOVE, and then how to recognize these. And it's very simple to apply them, even though the work to do it is not simple.
Okay, so you're saying if we're struggling with some of this psychopharmacology stuff or the trans stuff or whatever is coming at you.
Major life issues, within the context of family or friends or church or wherever it would be.
Okay, so let's start with L.
And so I jotted a few things down, and I'm fresh off several conversations with clients about these very type of issues, so it's really fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think the first one, and this comes, it sounds so simplistic, people might roll their eyes, but if this first part doesn't happen, you're going to lose the chance to influence, not necessarily now, but in the future. And that is to listen well. Don't just hear what the child is saying to you. Listen to the pain behind it. Listen to the concern behind it. Listen to the sociological belonging aspect of it. If they say something like, all my friends are on antidepressants, that's one thing. If they say, two of my friends now want to be called Joe and they were Jane, and they're going to consider having a procedure, I want to consider it too. The fear that strikes us is pretty dramatic. The fear of the antidepressant could be there, especially if our child says, hey, and by the way, there's many, many times I don't think I should live. I don't know why my purpose of living, why am I being here? That's any parent, any friend's going to get concerned. Any parent's going to,
absolutely,
it's going to hit you really, really hard. And we can get so stuck in the fear then that we immediately start to contain or control our child, which is not what they need in the midst of their heart. You might need to help control relationships as far as hanging out with Jim, Jane, Joe, Joanna, or whatever's going on there. You might have to contain those a little differently. You got to be careful to shun those relationships completely, because that has such an impact socially for your child that you got to be careful what that looks like. Plus, you can't, if they're going to stay at the same school or whatever, you can't control lunchroom conversations or notes passed or texting back and forth. But to listen and listen really, really well, and make sure you are affirming them as a person, as your child, as your niece or nephew, as your neighbor girl or neighbor boy, whatever the scenario is when someone opens up. Not necessarily affirming a delusional or evil or not appropriate comment, right? My boys were like me. They really liked stealing things for a while and even got picked up for shoplifting. And I didn't get picked up for shoplifting by the cops, but I did get busted for stealing at a neighborhood convenience store near Doherty. And also got busted for stealing a bunch of stuff at my school. It's usually food, usually snacks, but still, it was inappropriate.
You pass on that beautiful trait to your son.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it's beautiful.
And so when the boys would say something to me, and I love the fact that my sons have always been brutally honest and upfront about what they're wrestling through, which is super helpful. Some kids don't. Some boys don't tell their parents anything, and you have no idea what's going on. But, Jacob would say, I like stealing, Dad. It's really fun. And then we'd talk through it. Right. And we'd talk through it. And what about it? And what makes it wrong? Why is it not inappropriate? But if I had said something like, don't you ever steal again? I can't believe you have that. You have the wickedness in you. Right. Jay would have just, like I would have done if Dad would have done that to me. And I go, oh yeah, I'm going to start stealing bigger then. Because if you're going to tell me now that I'm condemned and wicked and wrong as your primary, not failing to teach consequences and sin and morality, but if you're going to lead with that and I don't feel loved and affirmed by you as a person, as your child, then it's going to promote even further, especially if they're rebellious, further behaviors outside of what our standards and our convictions and how we're trying to raise our children. I'll pause for a minute before I go into more, just to give you some feedback time about the listening and affirming them as a person. Point one.
Well, I just want to, just a real quick response to that would be Diana Baumrein's model of parenting styles, which we've talked about on the podcast many times, but it bears repeating here. It's a very clean, easy to remember model. And it's been tested since the 70s when she came up with it in a multitude of contexts and cultures. And it always shows to be the best way to parent. And it is high levels of expectation and consequences. So to your point, you don't tolerate bad behavior. You do not reinforce bad behavior. You don't turn a blind eye to bad behavior. At the same time, this high level of what she calls demandingness, I expect a lot of you, is paired with an equally high level of warmth, love, what she calls responsiveness, the affection, the caring, the empathy, the listening, the affirmations.
Grace.
So we have both high levels, and you could take this to being a professor. You need that in your classroom. You need that as a manager of people. So all that to say, it sounds like what you're saying is, yes, you have this high level of demandingness, but it doesn't come with a high level of criticism and degrading. And again, like you speaking negativity into the child, but rather that was wrong. You know it. As of course I still love you. And that's what came to mind. So that's the model that I think is probably very difficult when a parent is shocked and scared. So often our very visceral responses and even anger can be rooted in fear.
Absolutely. And we have our own, the kid shares trauma with us. Hey, by the way, Dad, I was inappropriately touched by the janitor or something, or by the neighbor boy. And you're like, right. And before you can even finish affirming your young daughter or young son, you're grabbing the baseball bat and heading out the door. Which I understand as a dad completely.
Yes, of course.
And you might need to go challenge that man. I would say leave the bat at home. You might need to challenge that man at some point or get the police involved immediately, depending on the scenario. But in your effort to, eradicate the wickedness or the evil that's right there, don't miss the chance to first listen and affirm your child 100%. And a majority of kids, as you know, feel like they are at fault with all abuse. And so to make sure you really focus there first, honey, I don't care what you were wearing or what you're involved with. This is not your fault. This is inappropriate. This adult is completely wrong. We're going to need to press charges, or we're going to need to go confront the source, whatever the scenario is, has to be there. So listen, the acronym's LOVE, by the way, so it's pretty easy. So listen well. The O is ownership. And what I mean by that, Karen, is if you don't have any idea about this gender fluidity nonsense in the world right now, and your child starts to bring some of that stuff up, you better take ownership and learn. And not just go, oh my gosh, my child's, freaking out and they're crazy and we're going to get them counseling and everything, which is good. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you need to become an expert. You need to quickly, I think David said it, one of the things he said was, the evidence is there. We just don't research. We just buy into the fallacy And it has been great propaganda for 50 years.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So we just buy in and we assume it's right. Just like the food pyramid is nonsense. And we assume that was right all these years, right? And all that does is create diabetes. It's another story.
That's why everyone's obese and diabetic.
And then we go right back at it. And so within that realm, right, as I struggle with ADHD, what we used to call hyperactivity, was there a surprise that Dad had like 17 books on it in our downstairs bookshelves? Even though he knew he kind of had it himself, he'd learned how to cope and learned how to manage and learn how to take care of himself and make it a gift, not a curse, etc. And so we've had other traumas and things happen to our family over the years. And right, we were infertile. We didn't know why. I started reading every single book I get my hands on. Right, taking ownership didn't mean it's solved. Right, I wasn't saying, oh, if I read these 7 books, Angie's going to get pregnant. But rather, I'm at least going to know and understand the scenarios, the concern. What does undiagnosed or undifferentiated infertility mean? It didn't make sense to me. Well, it meant there was no specific biological reason, right? And so then you have to look at the psychological and everything else. We've all done those kind of things. But for a parent, when we get nervous and scared, often we make the accidental mistake. I'm going to go to an expert, and we don't vet or filter our experts. Right. Sometimes it's based on the insurance, which understandable, things are expensive. And we end up going with the insurance one because it's available and close in there, and find out that person is very pro trans or pro something else that we are trying to actually work against in some capacity through truth and action and movement. And now all of a sudden we've almost influenced our child accidentally the wrong way, but by not taking enough ownership.
Yeah,
we need to know more.
Well. Yeah. David spoke to as well. A lot of these professionals have been captured by this very warped ideology for their own reasons, because they don't want to lose their license, and this has become the standard of care to chop off.
And so maybe you're not a researcher, maybe you're not a big reader. Well, find a podcast. There's tons out there, and start learning more about bipolar, or learning more about these other conditions that are getting so popularized and so identified that people use it in their regular vernacular.
The diagnosis du jour is what I call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
and it was borderline 20 years ago, and now it's bipolar.
And whatever it is, get some ownership, figure it out, read about it, so you can talk to your child with education and compassion at the same time. Not just, well, honey, I don't understand it all, but if you think you need to go on a SSRI, we'll just go over and get started. And you haven't read about SSRIs at all. You don't know a thing about them.
Or you've read sources that were funded by Eli Lilly, which makes Prozac.
Yeah. And so you have to do and sift and I understand busyness by all means. And I understand difficult challenges in life, but you're talking about your child, you're talking about your friend, you're talking about your niece, your nephew, whatever. Take the time to dive in. If you have to shorten your workouts for 2 weeks to research, you need to do it. If you have to, cancel date night once or something so you and your wife can go to the library together or get online together, whatever it is, to make sure you're taking ownership with your child. The child needs the parent to be the adult. And sometimes we accidentally allow our child to lead themselves into the woods of pharmacology or mental health identification that is very dangerous and very scary, even on the other side, even on the weaning side or the tapering off side. We'll just drop everything. Well, that's not very wise either. It's very dangerous. You have to do it specifically and intentionally and have some ownership there as well.
And I want to just say just a word of empathy for the parents, Elliott, because I have been thinking, my PhD is in developmental psych. So this is something I've thought a lot about, though I'm not a parent. For many, many years, I believe parenting is way harder. And I do believe parents have become softer in some ways. Mm-hmm. And let me speak to this just briefly. Gen X was raising kids. Our parents raised us, and much of what we went through, of course, times change, generations are different, but most of what they were instilling in us was based on the way they were raised. Whether they were going to do like our parents, look at some of the ways that they were raising, do the opposite, because that would be better. Yeah. But Gen X raised kids with phones. This was novel. No one knew what to do with this. Gen X, to the point of this podcast, had to raise kids with a pharmacological influence that was propaganda in my mind coming.
Yeah, but that was the lens.
That was the lens. And this was not something we were raised with. So because we didn't even have Ritalin. Like they tried to put you on something. I don't know what it would have been, but it was not Ritalin the way it became like in like the 90s when it became just really common. Anyway, my point is it is harder. So I have a book that I bought for Warren and Leah, or for Warren for Christmas or for his birthday, whatever, called The Anxious Generation, which I'm going to, Jonathan Haidt, I believe is the author, I'm going to read for my class this fall, because as I teach child development, and this will be now, I've been teaching it for over 20 years, I can't teach it the same as I used to. Because when I was first talking about child development, I did not talk about this thing in people's hands, in children's hands throughout their entire developmental years during key
in the high chair,
times.
In the baby seat at Target,
restaurant.
having kids watching. Right. Yeah, it's scary.
We are dealing with things, and so my heart goes out to parents. It's harder, but you do have to inform yourself on realms that never occurred in your childhood, your own childhood. So it is harder. Parents for generations could just kind of do what their parents did or do the opposite, like we said. That is not the case anymore. We have to be more well-informed with sources that we can trust. And that's also tricky, Elliott, because you might think you can trust the source and you don't know that the source is actually funded.
That gets me to letter V. Perfect. You just led right to it. Validity.
I'm good like that.
Validity.
What? Validity. Mm-hmm.
So it's listening well, ownership, and get yourself fully engaged. So that your child's like, oh man, my dad's confused, but man, is he busting his tail to figure out bipolar. And
he will see that.
Right. And they'll feel that.
You bring up bipolar though, Elliott. I have to take a break because bipolar now has become the du jour.
I know.
This is bipolar 2 we're talking about. Bipolar 1 is what we learned in our coursework, which was manic depression is what they used to call it. This would be
with
a
manic lead.
You could not get out of bed for 2 weeks, and then you would cycle over to mania, which made you look almost psychotic. You'd be running around the neighborhood saying you were, I'm Mary, the mother of Christ or something.
Delusional, so
my point is bipolar 2 has not the same extreme fluctuations, but it has some of that. I do need to say there's research that shows.
But the depressive side's in the lead rather than the manic side, which is so dramatic.
And it's not quite as intense. Like you are able to get out of bed and probably get into the shower. My point is there's research now that shows that if you are on an SSRI, so Prozac or Zoloft, Wellbutrin I think is also, or it might be slightly different, whatever. If you're on an SSRI for a period of time, and I'm not sure the exact length, you are 40%, no, I shouldn't say 40%. I think it is 40% more likely to get a bipolar 2 diagnosis. My point is we are seeing some conditions that are probably side effects of these pharmaceuticals. But again, pharma's not going to tell you that because they're happy you're on the SSRI. Now you get bipolar, they can give you a pill for that. I had to just say that because...
No, it's good. And one of the things you and David talked about that I have not fully researched, but I know I heard it somewhere, so I'm saying it out loud, even on the podcast. So hopefully you and others will research. If I have the time, I will do it as well. That this chemical imbalance myth can happen if you're on these things so long. It does alter your brain enough. Now you do have a legitimate imbalance, but the medication created it. It wasn't there.
Yeah.
And some of that can be true with nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol too, that we got to be careful about because I've been studying all 3 of those quite a bit lately. So the validity, Karen, is difficult because our truth sources can be blinded. Yeah. We can feel I'm only watching this news or I'm only listening to this person. And I do this intentionally. I will try at times to listen to podcasts or broadcasts that are completely on the opposite side of me just to learn and listen. And try not to get too angry or upset about it, but just try to listen and say, what are people saying about this stuff? Even people who are against Jesus. It's not just political or medical or athletics or anything else. Sometimes it can be faith-wise. What's this guy talking about from this church that's growing like crazy? But some of my students told me it was spooky in there. It felt evil. I'm like, well, I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear what's going on so then I can speak to it. I'm not going to go there and worship there for 6 months and get myself in trouble, but I'm going to listen to a message so I can better inform myself to help the students, or go online and read their doctrinal statements and see if I can find something. So in our validity, the Bible says many, many, many times to seek godly counsel. And counseling wasn't a professional, profession until 70 years ago? For the first 1800 years, 1900 years after Christ, it was, you got counsel from your priest, you got counsel from the pastor, you got counsel from the wise elders in the community.
Right.
And so be careful using your validity as primary through social media or the outlets that you already feel are yours. Rather, go find some people who've been through the same stuff, right? Go find live human beings who, if you're a believer, they are also a believer. You trust them. They're open. They're honest. They're raw. Seek some old school, in-person, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul counsel. And that's very scriptural that we, for first, 2 Corinthians 1 says that we comfort others with the comfort we have received. In other words, Paul's kind of telling us, hey, when you go through these suffering, traumatic experiences, part of the healing is to help others through the same. And AA is led by drunks, and NA is led by drug abusers, and SA is led by sex addicts, right? We tend to see that in the high issues, and it's the same thing in some of the realms of mental health or particular conditions. And that's sometimes hard to do. You have to work hard to find it.
Yeah. I just think of my own, as I've grown up, and certainly grown up in the church, as we talked about earlier, there were times when I would just be like, oh yeah, well, I'll see what someone else has to say. And that's fine. All truth is God's truth. I just feel like the older I get, the more I'm like, I don't like, I'll listen to other stuff. And I do think it's valuable to see how other perspectives, it's important to. And in fact, some of the podcasts that I like to listen to with the political stuff are people who are on the left or were on the left. And now they're kind of like, wait a minute, what's actually happening here? So I like to hear, I don't want to just necessarily listen to someone who's been a conservative their whole life. But at the same time, the older I get for that personal counsel, I love being part of this women's ministry at our church, because there's women who are a couple years older than me, like pillars of the faith. And I'm like, I'm just wanted to soak up from them. Like I told Mom the other day, I'm like, Mom, really, I can look back on my life, and if I had worn a little bracelet that said, what would Nancy do? And followed that, although I did have that in my ear my entire life. But of course, like any daughter, I had to go in my own way. But I'm like, Mom, if I'd done everything you told me to do, everything would have been a lot better in my life. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, but and that's true. And it's wonderful that you had such a godly mother to model after. But in order to truly find yourself, you have to sometimes choose your own path. You have, or at least try a couple angles here and there. Yeah. I'm glad I rebelled when I did. I'm not glad it was sinful, and I hurt a lot of people, but I'm still glad it happened all then. And so by the time I really cemented and surrendered myself to Christ in my late teens, early 20s, I didn't have that itch. Some of my friends will talk about, like, man, sometimes I just feel like I want to do something crazy because I've been a good boy all my life. I'm like, shoot, bro, don't go there. I did it. It's a nightmare.
Well, you got it out of your system when you were younger. Yeah. Instead of when you're 45, have some midlife crisis and blow up your marriage. Yeah. Or all the people you've ministered to over the years, and then you throw that all away with some stupid actions. So the E is engage. And that means you can't just take ownership and learn and seek the truth without getting back into the conversation with your kid, back into the conversation with the neighbor, consistently checking in, connecting. And when necessary, if it comes down to that demarcation line of decision making, and this is a tough thing to tell our children sometimes, but to say things like, honey, I've owned this and I've researched and I've looked through it and spent hours and hours and hours. I'm going to continue to talk with you about these scenarios and what's going on with you. But until you're an adult on your own, we're not going to go there. And I love you, and I know it's my responsibility. You might be mad, and you might be hurt, you might be frustrated, you might not want to talk to me. It's my responsibility before God and before the state to be your parent and make these decisions for you. So I'm sorry, but we're not seeking an SSRI. And once you're an adult and you're on your own insurance and everything else, if that's what you decide to do, I'm still going to love you, and I'm going to affirm you as a person, but I still won't be able to give you my blessing on that. Yeah, I just know too much about this. I can't bless it, but I can affirm you, and I'm going to love you anyway. And I want to be able to have that conversation. And those are really difficult scenarios when your child is purposely is not the right word. Your child's intentionally choosing something that you know is not good for them, and you can't stop it. And at times we want to condemn or criticize, and it rarely helps. Or in this case, you're saying you have to stop it, or you have to stop the choice that they're pursuing because they're under 18 and you're bankrolling their life. And so and you have the authority. It's God given. And I do see some parents, like I was saying earlier, where parenting has become softer in some ways. I think it's partly, we could blame like Dr. Spock, go back to some of like some of the parenting ideology that was coming up right around the time we were kids. So we weren't fully influenced by it, but there has been a little bit of kids are people too. Yes, kids are people too. I'm not trying to go back to the days when kids were working in the factory 14 hours a day, but we also have to remember kids' brains are not fully formed until we now know mid to late 20s for the young men. Parents, it is God-given authority. You have to, if you are not the adult in the room, if you are not parenting and letting the kid, like you spoke about earlier, have too much of have the child have the ownership or have too much of leadership in the home. That's one of the reasons I think a lot of these kids have quote unquote anxiety, because they are not equipped. And yet parents are giving them this decision-making ability. And they're going at some level down deep, kids want parameters. They want boundaries. And you're abdicating that. And that's causing some of this mental health issues with these young people too, I believe.
Yeah. And the research supports containment with freedom, but containment. So they know what the standard is. They know what the limit is. They know what the boundary is. Yeah. And then give them freedom to be who they are within that.
Within that.
Right. I never had to give my girls a specific time to come home. My boys had very strict hours. Did Dad give you any restrictions? I had extremely strict hours for when I was supposed to be home, not be home. Maybe on dates, he would have put something on you. But in general, you had shown trustworthiness. My daughters did as well. And they just weren't the kind to stay out. They wanted to get sleep. And so parenting, sometimes in our mistakes we make in parenting is we're trying to be fair between all the kids, and every kid's different. Even my twins are different. Even within the twin factor, they're still different. And so how you structure that containment, but allow them to be themselves still in order to kind of grow and develop and find their identity. But we just can't release children to find any identity, which is what they'll do. If you just kind of say, well, figure it out. If you think you're a girl, be a girl. If you think you're a boy, be a boy. If you think you're a shoe, be a shoe. If you think you're a pencil, be a pencil. Right? We can accidentally. I know it's happening. Absolutely. And so we're in the name of allowing our children to be free, we're creating a nightmare. We're creating prison. We're creating bondage. And so we have to be freedom of their personality and temperament. Yes, not freedom of expression. It's not appropriate if I said to my sons, because they had tempers, it's totally fine if you punch a kid in the face. If he deserved it and he said it, yeah, it's fine. You're just releasing your anger. You're just expressing yourself. I don't want to force you to learn self-control with your anger. That's ridiculous. Right? There's a reason, like you said earlier, I think on one of the podcasts, you said there's a reason kids aren't allowed to drive at age 12.
Yeah.
They have to be 16. I wish it was 18. There's a reason, you can't drink alcohol until you're a certain age, even though we know kids drink way early and parents often allow it. And there's all kinds of hyperbole within this, but I thought that acronym would be helpful to our listeners that are maybe wrestling in the middle of some of this and needed some hands-on amidst all the great research and understanding they were hearing. So the acronym is LOVE, which is simple to remember: listen, ownership, validity, engagement. And that engagement keeps happening all the time.
Excellent. I think it was very appropriate to bring some brass tacks and practical application. It's funny when we're talking, I'm always asking you for that. Yeah. And then here I was very comfortable just getting all esoteric, because that's also like the side of me that's like, we can just talk about this.
It was great research. Absolutely. It was wonderful.
But yeah, thanks for bringing that home. Let's pray it out, and then we'll keep moving on, and let us know. I'll be sending out a newsletter this week, and let us know if there are any kind of other topics that you want us to address. We'll keep moving with this series, but then, like I said, we'll bring in some other topics du jour. We don't want to just always keep it just straight pharma, although I could go there all day long. But
yeah, and I think in the, since I like to teach on process addictions as much as, medication or drug, alcohol, substance addictions, we should do another one, even though we've done several of these in the past on It's Just the Phone.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Because what we're learning, of course, is highly, highly dangerous and
well, let me, as I get into that book, that will, I'm sure, have a lot of information
more meat on that one.
It'll be mostly for the kids, but I'm sure that he'll bring up research that's related to all of us anyway.
Yeah. So. All right, Lord, bless our listeners. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity just to give some pragmatism and some concrete examples of ways to have conversations with our children or the young people around us, in our family, in the neighborhood, on our teams, in our clubs, that, Lord, if we are an open, loving, gracious, strong leader of whatever we're doing, people are going to open up to us. And so in any capacity, when young people open up to us, may we use this acronym of the greatest of all gifts, love, and make sure we're listening really, really well and affirming them as individuals, even when we can't affirm what they want to do or what they're considering, and to take ownership and learn if we don't know, and research and study and read and teach our child and that young person every bit as much as we're learning. And then seeking truth, starting with your truth, Lord, with your word, and getting some godly counsel where we need to and how we can. And if we don't have anybody in that realm, we can, Karen and I would be glad to provide some of that for any of our listeners as well. And then that engagement, long-term engagement, if our child's 12 and they're going to be wrestling with this till they're 18, until they're adult, or 21 when they have their own insurance or whatever it would be, that we just stay engaged, stay connected, bring the topic up, not be scared, not live in the fear, live in the faith, live in the engagement, and stay connected. And Lord, we just pray for blessing and understanding and discernment and even life change for all of us when necessary regarding all of these difficult and challenging issues. So we love you, Lord. We thank you for this time in your precious holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Love and Life with Dr. Karen and Pastor Elliott is produced by Tim May and executive producer Dr. Karen Anderson-Abel. For more information about Love and Life, please go to loveandlifemedia.com.